Good evening, everyone. Good evening for me. Good afternoon for you. Delighted to be here. I'm Richard Forrest. I'm going to be the moderator this evening. I'm a senior associate at Hayes Connor Solicitors Lawyers, who are a leading claimant firm of data breach specialists based in the UK doing claimant work. So really looking forward to this evening. Got a lot of interesting topics. So I'm just going to quickly pass over to the panel so they can all introduce themselves and a bit of their background before we get going. Liron, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, hey, it's great to be here. I'm Liron Barak, CEO and co-founder of BitDam. We're a cybersecurity startup, and we are actually located in Tel Aviv in Israel.
Hi, my name is Jeff Bohren. I'm the Chief Software Engineer for OpM. We're a provider of cloud identity access and management services.
And I am Dan Conrad. I hope my audio is fixed. And I am a solutions architect for One Identity, which is an identity security company.
Hi, my name is Rod Simmons. I'm VP of Product Strategy for StealthBits. We are an identity access governance solution.
Okay, great. Now, I think we can all safely say that this year has been somewhat unique in the challenges that I think every industry and everyone has faced. And obviously the topics that we're going to discuss tonight, no different. It's all been impacted by the pandemic. So first thing that we're going to look into, guys, is sort of the cyber threat landscape generally, focusing on sort of COVID-19 attacks, the increased rise in phishing attacks, how this is involved, what tax ethics, and how you think the landscape is looking, how it's going to be evolved, and how the impact of the pandemic has influenced that.
So I can start.
or anyone else, feel free to. Yeah.
Okay, I hope that you can hear me well. Sure, I would love that. Okay, so I would say that from our experience, like what we experienced, I don't know, since March or something like that, is we are a vendor that, just to give a bit background, so we are protecting against the threats that are hidden in files and links and are being sent through the different collaboration channels, email, which is the major one, but also Teams and Slack and Skype and Zoom. I hope that you can hear me well, but I will keep going and let me know if there are any issues. Great. So as I said, we are a vendor protecting from threats that are hidden in files and links across all collaboration channels, email, which is the major one, but also Zoom and Slack, Teams, OneDrive, Google Drive, etc. And actually, we see a massive increase in phishing attacks, in phishing attempts in different organizations, from very small ones to actually huge enterprises across the world, like different locations. And we see that attackers are becoming, much more sophisticated in the types of phishing threats that are there are various new types of phishing attempts. For example, just last week we published a blog post about a trend that we are seeing in Zoom links, like Zoom invites that are being sent to people and are very successful in actually stealing user credentials. This is just an example. Those like the attacks again are becoming much more sophisticated and are able to actually bypass a lot of security solutions, and this is actually a very significant challenge that was before pandemic, but now it just became, I would say, worse for organizations from all.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Rod, you got a view on that?
Yeah. So I was going to say I agree with what Liron has said. One of the biggest challenges I think we are always dealing with, and I don't think COVID has anything to do with it. It's human nature. I always joke and say that Nigerian prince still has that money for you, and it's the truth, because when someone sends you an email and you're a sales rep and it's like, here's the quote you've been waiting for, your tendency is to want to open it up to see, is it what you've been waiting for? Because every sales rep is waiting for that sales quote, or every VP is waiting for a document to come in. So the idea of people clicking on links that look like valid emails, I mean, that's tried and true. It's worked always, and mainly because it targets human behavior. I think what we've seen at that transition for COVID, and probably the biggest challenge in the market, is that our signal to noise ratio has dramatically shifted. So if you think about most organizations pre-COVID, probably 5, 10, maybe up to 20% of their workforce was remote. And then all of a sudden COVID hits, and you're talking many organizations were at 100%, if not upper 90% of their workforce was remote. So the signal to noise ratio as to valid activity versus malicious activity had dramatically changed from what was coming outside the firewall trying to come in. And then applications that you had at one point in time said, those are only available when you're on the local network, not available on the VPN. All of a sudden you had to make access to many more aspects of your network available for users coming over VPN-based connections. So this has been just such a dramatic change for many organizations over time.
Yeah. Jeff?
So Optimal IDM we're a vendor of cloud identity access management services. And I want to echo what Rod said. I 100% totally agree with all that. We're seeing the same thing for our customers. And in fact, it was interesting you mentioned the Nigerian prince, because we've actually had customers that they've decided they don't do business in certain continents. And so they have basically disallowed all traffic from entire countries, continents, or regions. Which is something we can accommodate our customers in handling that for them, which is one way that they've attempted to address the phishing attacks, because most of them do come from outside the United States if they're made against United States enterprises.
Okay, Dan, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, as long as my echo is fixed, I can hear just fine. But like Rod was saying, we spend a lot of times in the identity and access management space trying to set users up so that they can't fail, or that they can't do things wrong, and then they really just find new ways to do things wrong. Or the people that are using phishing as an exploit find better and better ways to. We used to look at phishing and say, well, you look for typos, look for malformed paragraphs, or things that obviously aren't in your first language. But then they've gotten better at that. So they took that to heart. So you're just kind of moving that around. So until we train our users to, sort of be suspicious of everything, then I think we're still going to have this problem, because we're just going to be moving threats around.
Dan, I think you hit it right there. I love that. I'm actually stealing that where you said better ways to do things wrong, because it is the problem that we're faced with end users. And everybody on this call is probably at a very large percent of their life worked remote, and we're dealing with a significantly less tech savvy remote workforce. And that, for many people, like most of us probably would go into like a coffee shop and would still pair to our phone to get onto the internet. Whereas think about it now that so many people are working from home with their kids who got laptops from school. And I couldn't think of a worse environment for to have a corporate asset that lives all day long, other than on a network with a bunch of kids who want to play and download anything. And I'm not disparaging any kids. I got 4 of them, but it is a problem when you think about that. The network you're on is no longer deemed secure. So what malicious stuff that they download that could have compromised the router that can now manipulate or look into any traffic that's trying to egress your network? It's a big challenge we're sort of dealing with. And a lot of it does evolve around that first part of being a remote workforce and not being prepared for that rapid transition.
Really interesting. Yeah, really great stuff, guys. Just in terms of moving on to a slightly separate topic now, which isn't sort of, well, it's still related to COVID, but it isn't sort of as much impacted by COVID. I'd be interested to hear your guys' views on how you think companies should store the data, not just biometrically, but also user behavior information and passwords. Obviously, Rod and Liron, your specialist product guys. So would you like to sort of take the lead on this in terms of your views on that?
Sure, I'll jump in first. And so for starters, I think we all at least agree, and I hope everybody on this webcast would say, data has to be stored encrypted. Data in flight and at rest needs to be encrypted. With biometric data, it's slightly different, and I'm a firm believer that biometric data needs to be device level. So I think when we all first saw, I guess the iPhone, I'd say, would probably be the first where most people were doing biometric data. Everybody was like, I'm not putting my fingerprint on there and sending to Apple. And Apple was very forthcoming up front. We don't store your fingerprint. It's at the device layer. It's encrypted on the device. Destroy the device, it goes with it. We never have it. And as you start looking at new devices that are coming out that are storing biometric data, like YubiKey is coming out with one, I think, next year, all the data is stored on the device. This ensures that we don't see another breach like OpM where they lose high resolution fingerprints, which I imagine if anybody in here has DoD certification, they were impacted by a breach that severe where my fingerprint is now out there, high resolution scan, because some attacker breached the organization. Even the most secure organizations, and this is no disparaging to like, I think it's FireEye recently suffered a security breach. Even companies that sophisticated to do everything right and penetration test themselves constantly, if a state initiated attack comes after them, they may lose data. So that's why we have to ensure data is always encrypted in flight at rest. And we try to only maintain the data we require to have.
Okay, great. Dan, do you want to come on that?
Sure. So, Rod had to bring up the OpM breach. So I've been a victim of that repeatedly. And not only did I get the letter telling me that it was security clearance information. So that's literally everything in your life. And then, so that was in the hands of the attackers, but everybody I used as a contact also got the same letter. So I was getting a lot of thank yous through the mail and things like that. But, from that perspective, in that case, you're talking about a compromise of privileged credentials. So they stored the database encrypted and things like that. But the attackers honestly didn't even realize the database was encrypted because they walked in the door with privileged credentials and compromised it via privilege. So we spend a lot of time focusing on, the right way to manage privileged credentials or even understanding where their privileges lie and the vulnerabilities that are, associated with somebody walking around the network with privileges all the time. So we wrap that all up. And then, the nice thing you can do now is you can tie that to biometrics as well and things like behavior analytics so that you can know where these privileged credentials are behaving and how they're acting. And then when they start acting strange or doing things they've never done before, at least somebody will know about it. And hopefully you can take action on that.
And Dan, probably to add on there, I mean, I don't have a horse in this race, but when you start thinking about the proper way to manage privileged credentials, I mean, you have huge vendors out there. You have One Identity, and they're vaulting, whether it be cloud or on-prem based. You have CyberArk sitting out there, Thycotic sitting out there, BeyondTrust sitting out there. There are tons of vendors who've really jumped in the space to help organizations securely manage privileged credentials and then provide programmatic access, constantly scrambling those credentials. So yeah, you can always trip over it. And I think you can store data encrypted, but if I'm acting as you, because normally on your machine you log in with privilege, well, I mean, you've pretty much made it game over. So I think no admin has any valid reason that their privileged credentials should not reside in a vault, such as something that you can get from like One Identity, for example.
Now, obviously, the next major topic was again, given the pandemic and moving into next year, how sort of companies can secure the hybrid sort of remote workforce moving into 2021. That's going to be a sort of huge challenge. Maybe, obviously, as a vaccine comes in, less of a challenge. But I think this year's altered most industries' work mindset, maybe forever, in terms of how they're approaching remote working and in-office working. So what do you guys think is still the biggest threat posed to these workforces and these companies moving into next year, considering where we're currently at?
Well, I mean, it's clearly still what it was before. It's still the phishing attacks, the number one attack, and the other attacks, are close behind it. It's not that the attacks necessarily have changed dramatically. It's that the attack surface has changed dramatically. Whereas before you had a relatively small footprint of the company employees that were working remotely, now that footprint has changed dramatically. So I think that's what's really changed. And I personally am shocked when talking to our customers how few of them have a plan to go back to normal. Everyone's basically taking a wait and see approach. That's not to say they won't go back to the way they were before 2020, but they honestly don't know when that will be. So they're all making plans moving forwards to have this bigger footprint that's exposed to malicious actors.
Yeah. Liron?
I can just say that Jeff, you talked about attack surface. So I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and there are different angles to that. There is what you said, and from another angle, I would say that a lot of organizations with the remote working started to communicate differently, store their data differently. So now everyone are using Zoom and Teams, and by the way, even more, let's call them more primitive organizations or smaller organizations that didn't tend to do that previously. Now they work with these platforms that everything is actually cloud-based. Also storage like OneDrive and Google Drive and Dropbox and Box and others. This became commodity. This is the new, this is what is going on today. And together with the use of these platforms with communication and collaboration channels, that everything is on the cloud, so became the need to secure them, as this is a real significant new attack surface. And attackers are aware of that, of course, and we feel that every day. So I believe that, and I don't believe, I see that this is a very significant challenge these days. And I believe that this will go with us all the way through 2021, and organizations will keep, making an effort in order to find the right solutions for that, but also to find, not a lot of solutions in order to solve, these kind of problems. So probably a suite or something like that will be able to answer, the different needs in order to minimize these attack surfaces that we currently have.
So I'll jump in really.
Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So, I mean, the catchphrase that identity is the new perimeter, it always has been, but now it's really officially declared the new perimeter when everybody went from home. Just like I think everyone else on the panel, I think most of us at Quest and One Identity were very efficient at working from home and used to that. So when I started talking to customers, March, April timeframe, I sort of assumed that everybody had the capabilities that we were already doing, and I was wrong. So what we learned was that we need to go talk to these customers about how to actually enable your users to work from home, and not just enable them, but allow them to do it securely. So a lot of the things that they were looking to do to enable their users to work from home securely were things that they had on their long-term roadmap anyway, things like multi-factor authentication and remote administration and that sort of thing. But that just got accelerated. So I hope when they executed those things that they needed to do to just get the job done, that they did it securely.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Dan. Identity, it's a true statement when you say identity is the perimeter. The challenge that I think many organizations are faced with, and I think Liron, she said it early on, is that that idea of going back to the new norm, the norm, what things were normally. First, I think most people would probably say my quality of life is a lot better. I get off work and my kids are like right there, or maybe you like the 2-hour drive home every evening. But I think we saw early in this whole transition that we had big companies. Back in, I think it was around May, Walmart came out with a very bold statement that said that thousands of their tech workers would continue to work remote post the pandemic. Like even as things subsided, And they were like one of the first big companies to make such a bold claim. And we've seen many follow. So we've seen organizations be required almost to make that rapid transition. What we've seen kind of at Omada is a rapid adoption of better understanding their identities and putting more process around how to properly manage and provision identities has come more to the forefront. I mean, if you look at things like compliance requirements, whether it be like CCPA in California or GDPR was driving that. But I would say for many organizations who just said, we really have brought improper process for onboarding and managing identities, this became something at the forefront that they wanted to jump ahead of. So as it relates to dealing with the hybrid workforce, I don't think that's going away. I think, well beyond 2021, 2025, we'll be dealing with this. And many companies are realizing the cost benefits of having a remote workforce that I don't think many are considering.
So one thing I wanted to bring up is,
I think
as far as
what we're
addressing
finding
this,
as well is over here, even companies that were well equipped.
the number one need. I'm sorry.
As well.
Should I go ahead? The number one ask I'm seeing from our customers. Yep. The number one ask I'm seeing from our customers is to accelerate the adoption of multi-factor authentication. And as Rod said, made a great point. These are all things that customers were planning to do anyway, but the workforce, the new remote workforce, has accelerated trends that were already in place. So number one ask we're seeing is adopting multi-factor authentication. And the number one multi-factor authentication our customers want is push authentication, simply because that's push to a device, simply because they see that as a very low cost option. But there's another one that's gaining in popularity that a lot of people don't know about, and that's typing behavioral biometric authentication as a second factor. That's becoming very popular because it's sort of ubiquitous. So we're seeing that being adopted by many of our customers.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like MFA, and again, regardless of the implementation, I just say please stop using like SMS-based MFA. But you're right. Like I think probably Duo was probably like the first where many people saw like that push, and it was like, this is just magical. I don't have to type in those stupid 6 digits anymore. But what it did, and again, if we go back to the whole identity as that perimeter, is it helped me validate who you were on the other end. And the logistical challenge that many, whether it be government or commercial organizations were dealing with it with MFA was, we always used to know how to just distribute tokens when you were physically sitting here. Now we have a logistic nightmare of trying to distribute those. And if you had to elevate that to smart cards, you had to try to provide facilities for people to come in and for you to do identity verification, so you could hand them their smart card, or in some cases hand them their token so they could go do that verification. But yeah, I think Jeff, you hit it right. The first thing that everybody were dealing with was, if we're going to let them on our network, they absolutely 100% have to have MFA as they move forward.
Right, and many of our customers are using a self-enrollment model for that, where the end users they've got their smartphone, they're downloading the software, whether it's Duo or our push notification software, and they're self-enrolling themselves, so they don't have to burden the enterprise with those kind of resources to roll that stuff out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, when it works right, it works. It's us being in the identity and access management space. When we see something and it works so easily that it just baffles you, sometimes you got to take it back apart and figure out if it was actually secure or if that was a vulnerability. When you authenticate, that was just way too easy. And then things are getting so good now with multi-factor that you can actually dive into that, and you can have multi-factor on something and have it work very seamlessly from a user experience perspective. So I think there'll be wider acceptance, especially when we're talking about privileged access. I mean, we're almost, when you're talking about checking out credentials and things like that from a PAM solution, if you don't put multi-factor on the front end of that, you're really doing it wrong. So,
yeah, the whole idea of the password password-only security is like, I mean, I don't think there's probably anybody on here, that's not probably using a personal password manager. I won't speak of the one that I love so much, but I imagine we're all probably using password managers. Most of us have asked at gunpoint to say, give me the first letter of your like Amazon password. I couldn't even begin to tell you. I know it's probably 100+ characters, and that's about all I got for you, but that's the direction we need to go for. What I'm hoping to see, at one point in time, I remember companies would say, hey, at our company, you can run McAfee on your work machine, but we've also provided so you can leverage it on your home machines. It was like they pre-license things like that. I'm hoping we'll see that same transition to like IoT for home networks. Because I think everybody on this call has a bunch of home automation, and it's all running on for separate hardware, separate networks within your home, because you're like, I'm not putting that camera I got from, wherever on my network with all my real stuff. I'd rather have it isolated on a network. But most people don't live and work that way. So I think if companies are going to want to really step that game up for their customers and help them, or their employees, and help them secure their networks, part of that transition is going to be able to scan, identify IoT devices, detect firmware out of date, if there are exploits available, and helping them patch and secure their networks so that they know people are coming from at least a more secure network than likely what they're dealing with today. All right.
We may have lost Richard momentarily. So, I mean, we could pass it around a little bit. We haven't heard from everybody on this subject. I'm looking at people like they're looking back at me, but feel free to jump in there, Liron.
So actually, I was right before the call. I jumped on, and I was really excited when I looked at. I think it's called BitDam, is how you pronounce your product, Liron. And I think probably the thing that most excited me. And so we all know that the biggest attack vector often is email. And the thing that excited me is when I went to your website, it jumped out and says, we stop phishing malware that all others miss. And that's the problem we have to solve. We can get as sophisticated as we want as it relates to security, but if we don't start at the most fundamental thing, so what are you guys doing that's so special? I'm genuinely curious, because you look at Google, you look at Microsoft, and yet I still say, like, why am I getting this email? So what is it that you guys are doing that is making it so that that email doesn't get to my inbox, so that I don't click on that malicious link?
So this is a great question. I would say that, this is our claim to fame. You're right. Like, we stop malware and phishing and, BC threats that other vendors are missing. And I'm also talking about, the big known players in this industry. Because email, is something that is still the significant channel for all of us to communicate. All solutions out there, if I will make it really short, all solutions out there are actually using a very reactive technology that is based on, knowledge that they have about the threats, how phishing threats used to look, and how this malware act or behave, and just collecting a lot of data in order to recognize what is malicious. And this is actually the problem itself. Like, this kind of approach or mechanism is actually the problem and not the solution. And why is that? I talked about it in the beginning, that phishing is on the rise, and that there are actually hundreds, if not thousands, of new trends of phishing attacks every week. This is what we see in our customer base, that are, customers are telling us, this is crazy. Like, we experience so many new phishing threats every week, every day. Each customer actually experienced that. And the thing is that you just cannot, detect those threats if you are just those new threats, if you are actually basing your detection mechanism on the knowledge that you have about the threats, because you only have knowledge about what you know. The thing is that we are using a kind of, proactive approach that is not based on anything related to data that we have about the threats, but about the legitimate behavior of our applications. And this is why we are able to detect attacks on first sight, no matter if it's phishing or malware or something else. which is what makes us really unique. And if you look in our website, so you probably saw some numbers, yeah?
Yeah.
We're detecting like 35% more or 40% more than the leading vendors in the industry. And this is like based on customer data, like different enterprises and SMEs. And we collected this data for a long time. And now we have proofs that this, method or mechanism, or actually some patents that we have, those are really effective in order to, close this gap that currently, organizations are having and struggling with.
That's pretty awesome. So one of the other pieces that I wanted to make sure that we touched on, and just to see like where you guys were at. I know that we've talked about, we're dealing with less tech savvy people, more people are actually working from home, but as it relates to the users, I think we all I think we heard some early breaches, and I'd say if we had to go back 7 years, big breaches that were losing like 100,000 credentials. It was the big news, and it was in 3 to 6 months before you were hearing about the next one. Now, I feel like they're coming so rapid fire. I want to say we're desensitized to security breaches at this point. It's like, everyone's going to fall at some point in time. Is anybody else sort of feeling that way? That every time you look, all you're seeing is
Definitely.
security breach?
Definitely. I certainly am. I mean, we get comment opportunities from PR companies on, this breach or that breach, and they're almost the same on every one of them. And they tell you about the data that was breached, and you want to go back and it's like, you remember that comment I gave you on the last 6 of them? The same thing applies, and it's the release of the data has varying effects, which is different for every scenario. But it's the core of the breach is usually the same. It's somebody forgot to protect something, or somebody just simply overlooked it, and it's just a little bit exhausting, to know. I think what we need to do is kind of make our data less relevant, right? So if if you're worried about somebody breaking in your house and stealing your diamonds, don't have diamonds in the house, something like that.
Yeah. I'm concerned that from an end user standpoint, they're so desensitized to security breaches, or more importantly, listening to the IT person sit up there and tell them how important it is for them to be secure, that it's just like, put your fingers in your ears and sort of walk away from the situation, because it becomes too much to have to deal with the ongoing security. And it is a big struggle for anybody who's trying to secure an organization of 40, 50 or 300,000 or 400,000 people, to get everybody to kind of come lock and step and recognize the importance that they play in securing an organization, and not just that it's IT's job to do so.
I would say that's why education of users and employees is really important, but it's not enough, to say the least. Security should be automated, and not only policies and education, because even for me, and I would say I'm coming from the other side of the fence, like the offensive side of the fence. I served in the army for 7 years in the cyber intelligence unit, and this is what I did, and this was my life, so I know it from and I'm familiar with that very closely. And I would say even for me, sometimes it's hard, to recognize threats, and I feel that I'm educated. So the thing is that automated solutions in order to detect those threats must be in place for all organizations, no matter if those are smaller ones or huge ones. I believe that this is a burning matter, I would say.
Well, I could probably get in trouble by saying this, but we've seen the number one security threat in any organization are the C-level officers. I'm sorry, but it's just been my experience, and it's just because they're super busy. They've got access to critical information. They don't have time to take training, and many of them have big egos, and they think nobody's going to fool them. So, and they're targeted. People specifically target them.
Jeff, not only have you hit a home run with this one, it's more annoying when you, and I'm sure you do MFA, and I know, Dan, you do a little bit with MFA, when you sit in a room and you're talking about the value of moving to multi-factor, and you have someone at the C level say, how much longer is it going to take me to log on? And you're thinking to yourself, seriously? like I mean, you're typing in like 6 digits, or, oh, it appeared on my phone and I hit approve. But yet that is such a barrier for some organizations. And it often starts at the top that I can't allow the users to take that much longer to log on. I mean, I remember trying to do this kind of stuff at hospitals, and NFC was what helped like doctors, and so they could walk in the room, tap, and they could deal with a patient. Like, I understood they were trying to rush through a bunch of patients. It was critical timing, but in a normal corporate environment like that, I don't know, 2 seconds it takes to complete the authentication process, or 1 if you're just doing a push. It's amazing how many people will put that little bit of additional convenience in front of security. Am I the only one?
Yeah, they need to understand the value of the identity. It's from a, it's like having keys to your building. If you're in a bank and you have a key to the vault, you don't leave the key laying around, but things can go missing, and identities are the same way. It's knowing the value of that identity, whether you're the enterprise admin or whether you're, the director of finance or a low-level worker in finance. All of those identities are, critical to the enterprise and can be compromised in different ways. So knowing those values, if the users can understand that, that would be a great thing to add to the education package that we teach them. So.
Okay, guys, I think I'm hopefully back. I mean, you guys are doing so well without me. I just thought I'd let you guys take charge, to be honest with you. I don't even think you realised I was gone. Just moving on to sort of the forefront of broader topic, and apologies, guys, if I've missed any of this whilst I was unfortunately absent. Quite a general question. How do we think cybersecurity will generally change in 2021? I appreciate, obviously, we've touched on, how 2020 is going to impact on that leading forward, but how generally do we think this is going to change in 2021 for various industries?
So
Rod,
I think, so I think what we're going to see in 2021 is really just going to be a continuation of 2020. I don't think it's going to be anything dramatically different. The challenges aren't going to change. Nothing's going back to normal anytime soon. I think the biggest thing that we saw in 2020 was obviously the increased attack surface. That's not going away. The bring your own computer to work, because now work is home, so now you have your home computer in many cases, not always, but many cases. That's not going away. So that I just see 2021 as being a continuation of 2020, only more so.
I would have to sadly agree with you, except for I'm hoping I can get out of home and go to a restaurant sometime soon. But yeah, I definitely agree. We're definitely on a continuation of the problems we dealt with. I do think we're going to start to see some organizations adopt, and I hate to say, like thin client computing, where you remote in when you want to work. So you connect, you remote in, and we have a secure desktop. You can work on that all day long, and we're at least getting you somewhat back in the network. If you're doing a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever that might be, they want you outside the network. Because I think we probably all saw that and laughed as you would jump on a call with people from one corporation and their network would die as soon as everybody jumped on and everybody's trying to do video chat conferences, transitioning all that video over the networks, and they just couldn't handle it, and they realized they had to fix that. But I do think we're going to start seeing a bit more of the adoption of secure workstations as we move into next year for many organizations.
Oh, I think a follow-up to 2020, right? So the things that we did wrong in 2020 to make 2020 happen, 2021 may give us an opportunity to go back and maybe execute some of those right. Some of the things we did to just enable people or enable our users, we can circle back and clean that up a little bit. We did a global survey where I think 35% of the IT administrators that took the survey said the work from home went smoothly. Well, I mean, whether you're a user or, the users may have thought it went very smoothly because now they're, flip-flops and a t-shirt working from home. But, from an IT admin, they were pulling their hair out because they were trying to enable everybody to work remotely, working remotely. So we'll see, if they swing back and send everybody back into offices like they were before, we'll see what that transition looks like. And then the initiatives that they put in place to enable people to work from home, that, the security initiatives, maybe they'll bring those around and look at those again and make sure that that was executed correctly.
Okay, great. What would you guys say, if you had to name it, is the single biggest thing that you've learned from 2020 and what's happened over the course of that time?
Yeah, so one thing, I don't want to say customers weren't willing to adopt SaaS solutions before 2020, but I'd still say there was a very cautious approach. 2020, the floodgates opened. Like, it was like, you're outside the network and we have to solve these problems. The willingness of companies to take highly focused security solutions and go all in on SaaS, whether you're looking at privileged access management solutions that had SaaS offerings that just weren't seeing that mass adoption, it's there. Identity access governance, identity management, multi-factor authentication, everything that was kind of at one point in time, we will never go SaaS on that. That all went out the window as soon as they said, we don't have users who are on-prem, so why does it have to be an on-prem solution? That adoption of SaaS was huge this year, and I think that Komodo's been open and it'll never be closed again.
Actually, Rod, I couldn't agree more. Like, we experienced that as well. This is like super accurate from my experience in 2020, I would say. In the second part of the year mainly. As you know, we used to work with organizations in different models. Like, some organizations were using Office 365, like fully cloud. Others, like relatively big and, financial organizations, they were using like Exchange, and we were protecting them in kind of hybrid mode because we are a SaaS solution and we had to answer, a lot of questions, and there were a lot of doubts sometimes regarding the fact that we are providing everything, in the cloud, like we are fully SaaS. And, there was such a, fast transition from this situation to the new situation, while, all organizations almost are working fully SaaS, no doubts about it. We don't really have anymore like customers that are using Exchange, almost like most of them Office 365. And not only that, they are getting the support of all of the collaboration channels because they will use Teams or Zoom or both. They would like to secure Slack, and, everything kind of changed. Actually, I feel that this was, COVID is not great, but this was a great transition for, for the industry, for sure.
So following on, I'm going to echo the statements that Liron and Rod made. We saw most of our customers already were SaaS customers because that's what we do. But what we saw was them onboarding many more additional employee SaaS products, employee productivity SaaS products than what they had in place already. So we definitely saw an acceleration of anything that let their employees work with each other more effectively. They were embracing those initiatives. And then, of course, also we saw an increase in adopting multi-factor authentication. So that was the takeaways we took from 2020.
Yeah, I think one of the buzzwords that came out of, probably 2019 and 2020 was the concept of zero trust.
Yes.
And, I kind of cringed a little bit when I first heard it. Actually, probably for the first 2 years I heard it until the marketing folks kept coming at me like, give me something about zero trust. But, now that NIST has actually come out with 800-207 and defined what it is, now I can say that it's no longer just a marketing term, that we can actually use zero trust as a baseline to design systems, architects, applications and networks. And I think as people start looking at things, looking at their current architecture or look at onboarding new systems, they're going to consider the concept of zero trust. Whether it's fully baked in or not, they're going to look to something like zero trust and try to retrofit it to old systems like Active Directory. But anything new that comes on board, they will at least be considering how authentication and access is granted within those systems in a more secure way.
Okay, great.
Hit a home run there.
I think obviously what's clear is companies have obviously learned a lot from this year and they'll continue to adapt moving forward to the challenges that they faced. But obviously the challenges aren't going to go away next year. So what does everyone think that the companies sort of generally will continue to struggle with in 2021, despite the adaptations that we've made, learning from what's happened this year? What does everyone believe people will continue to struggle with, no matter what they've learned this year, and with things improving with the pandemic? What does everyone think?
So I guess there's probably two part. One, I think we'll always struggle with that the idea of will people who are at home work. I think you can see by work product that people are actually who are at home are actually working, but the idea of the dog barking while you're on a conference call or someone having bad audio quality, it's part and parcel of what we're dealing with. What I'm hoping actually changes in as we move into going into next year, and I think many organizations haven't learned, is on breach is that level of transparency you need to be. Most people think about a breach and they say, or a vulnerability, like you detect a vulnerability in your software. That transparent disclosure that organizations do, and I think probably every company here, we all know that we don't write perfect software. No one does. And it's how you handle the incident when it comes up. And it's the same thing for companies. We know that you may be breached at some point in time. It's how you handle disclosure, notifying your customers and all that. I'm hoping that going into this year, that organizations take a cue from the utter transparency we got from someone like FireEye was absolutely fantastic. And we're going to continue to learn from that over time. And I'm hoping that many organizations will start to look at that and say, we just need to continue to maintain responsible disclosure, disclosing what we can at early enough time in the breach process. So those are the couple things that I think.
Okay, thanks, Rod.
So I guess I can go next. Probably the biggest challenge I see our customers have in 2021 is to be able to get a handle on what kinds of SaaS applications their employees have access to, and being able to create coherent business policies to determine that people have access to the SaaS applications they need and don't have access to the applications they don't. And then taking that further and being able to sort of audit the activity that their employees are doing across multiple SaaS applications. That's something very few of our customers have a handle on today.
I would just add on that, and I believe you guys addressed, most of my thoughts, but Dan touched it earlier, and he talked about, the perimeter in a different way, maybe, but I'm sure that everyone knew that the perimeter is dying, I would say, but 2020 just kind of proved that it's already dead. And cloud, and I talked about it earlier as well, but cloud is the new perimeter or the new network, because there is not really internal network anymore, or network to protect, or a gateway solution that can make you safe. And I believe that this state of mind, by the way, this new state of mind is not always easy to get. Organizations are already there, but they need to adjust to this new situation, also in terms of security. For sure, 2021 will be a kind of continuation to 2020 in adjusting and understanding what are the right solutions, what are, as Jeff said, the SaaS applications that my users are using, and what should I need to protect.
Yeah, so the identity is the perimeter, right? So you said the cloud, I say identity. It's identities in the cloud are the perimeter. But we're still seeing customers struggling with legacy things, or the legacy things like ransomware changing, the attackers changing. We've seen, I think the statistics are that the ransomware attacks have tripled since COVID-19. I don't know if it's related to COVID-19. It very well could be, because people are working from home and giving different entrance points into the network. But we're seeing the way the attackers are going after this is a little bit different. Instead of asking for $3 million to release the keys to your kingdom, they might ask for 5,000 or 3,000. Or, we even had one customer that came to us and didn't think that they were a candidate for ransomware attacks because they didn't really have anything worth taking. They weren't healthcare, they weren't finance, they weren't, manufacturing. They were a small transportation company with 25 employees, but they still paid the $3,000 to get their data back. The problem is, now that they got their data back, they don't know that they can keep it. So they might have to pay a $3,000 next month to get the same thing. So, and that was all based on a privilege elevation breach that they should have been looking at all along. but they didn't have the mindset that they were even vulnerable. So they're still going to be struggling with that kind of stuff coming up. And I think we'll see that as they struggle and they get a handle on that, the attackers will change and there'll be different struggles.
Dan, I think what you said is important is they said we don't have any data worth taking, and it's really the question was like they posed the question wrong. They said we don't have anything that you want, but you have something you want to keep, and that I think when you look at it that way, saying what is it that you don't want to lose? Well, we don't want to lose our data because that's our customer list. That's this that. Well, it may not be worth anything to me if I get it, but if you can't get it, it's super valuable.
Exactly.
So I'm hoping the other thing to tag on to what Jeff was saying is when you start thinking about companies that are struggling around the identity access governance, who has access to what, how are we provisioning access, which is definitely a struggle for most organizations. What's probably equally important is the idea of having this idea of permissions that will go away over time. So I'm going to grant you access to this, but you only have it for 30, 60, or 90 days. So that way, when you're hit with that ransomware attack that we talked about, we don't lose that user's data. We don't lose their data because my access is temporal. It expires in 30 days. Because what we do find out when you do the access review, and Jeff, I imagine you see the same thing, and also Dan, you see it too, is that when you do access reviews that are based upon audit data, most of the stuff you have access to, you haven't even looked at it in 6 months, a year, 2 years, or 5 years. So I don't mind that you can get access. What I mind is that you have access you're not using, and we can tighten those things up. And 2021 has to transition to that idea of expiring access, because I would imagine all three of our products provide that capability, and the usage of it is relatively low because customers are like, it's that friction of multi-factor again, right?
Well, I like to add layers to that, especially in the world of privilege there, Rod. I mean, what we're doing now in the areas of elevated access is if you need a privilege credential for the next 2 hours, the account that you check out to use that doesn't have any credentials. So or doesn't have any roles or group membership. So when you go reach into the PAM solution and check it out, we actually provision it to the right roles and groups so that when you use it, you can go use it. And then, whether you need a password or you just need a session, you use it that way. And then when you check it back in, it disables the account, changes the password, and strips the group membership.
So you're truly talking not zero trust, but truly zero standing privileges.
Well, we call it, yeah, that's the term that we've used as zero standing privilege. We call it just-in-time provisioning.
That's awesome.
So I'm glad you mentioned provisioning because that's one of my hot button items. So it's one of the big frustrations for us as an identity management vendor is too many of the SaaS applications out there don't support standard provisioning protocols.
Skim, please.
Yeah, they don't support SCIM. Very few of them do. In fact, most of them still want you to use an FTP file upload. And their idea of security is they made it a SFTP site instead of an FTP site. And I wish customers, if you're a customer on this call, and would you please contact your SaaS providers and ask them when they're going to provide SCIM provision interfaces. We desperately need that.
Or it's something to consider when you're onboarding new systems, new applications, right? Mm-hmm. Do they support SCIM? Absolutely. If they don't, next.
Thanks very much, guys. That's really all been useful. I'm just interested to know, actually, just from the legal side, obviously, it's interesting to know about, obviously, once an attack takes place, how quickly the customers and the clients are notified is a big thing following that and how it's dealt with. Obviously, I know over there, big, large-scale attacks like there was in the Equifax a number of years ago. I'm just wondering, on a more individual basis, on the small and medium-sized companies, when an attack takes place and customer-client data is lost, is there a normal legal avenue for individual claimants in that type of legal action, as opposed to the big group actions that you hear about very publicly on the news? Do you guys have any knowledge of that on the smaller data?
Are you talking from like the consumer perspective? Like, so if my data was breached, but
a client database, that client database is taken, that may contain address, national insurance numbers.
I don't know that I have legal recourse. I don't have knowledge of that, but I don't know that I have legal recourse here on that.
Right. Okay. I was just interested to know.
You'd have to prove damages, I believe, but I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. Because of GDPR, when it was brought in over here in sort of 2018, it just opened up a huge market, for the claimant side of things. and in many cases, without actually having to prove distress. You prove loss of control of that data through an attack, then you could have a viable legal claim. And it's a growing, a big emerging market that we're involved in. So I was just interested to see whether there's anything sort of equivalent over there and how that would be approached, really.
So, and I don't live in California, but CCPA is probably the most equivalent thing we have in the US. But I think even then, I think most companies, when you're storing your data, or you're checking some box at some point in time that says, we may lose it and you can't sue us. And like I say, I think most people are, I think all my data has been lost at some point in time. And I think most people are sort of comfortable knowing the general risk with it. It's what most people just want is that responsible disclosure. It's, if you've lost my data, just tell me in a timely manner. I don't want to hear about it 4 years down the road, like you've had with some companies. If you're telling me in 60 days is there was a breach, we lost data, this is the type of data we lost, and for the next year you have LifeLock or whatever it is they throw at you these days. I think that's all we're asking. That's all people want, is they want to know that they're at risk so they can replace a credit card and things like that. And more importantly, change a password, because no one is using multi-factor that's not technical, right?
Right. I make sure that I include backspaces in all my passwords just to throw people off.
Okay, guys. Well, that's all been really, really great. Apologies, I had to leave you for 5-10 minutes, but you did probably better without me than with me. But that's been really interesting. I really thank you all for your contributions to the topics, and I hope everyone found it engaging and useful moving forward. So hopefully, same time next year. I really enjoyed it. If anyone else has got anything to add, but it's all been great meeting you, and I've really enjoyed hosting it. And I've learned a lot from you guys. As I said when I came on, it was going to be interesting to hear what you said, because I've always cut at it from the opposite legal side, as it were. So it's been really interesting for me, and I've learned a lot from listening to you all.
Thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very much.